Rev up your engines! Modern car engines are complicated. They cost a small fortune if they wear out and you have to replace them or rebuild them. So you want to make it last as long as possible. So I'm going to give you some tips, many of which you probably never even thought about, to make it last as long as it possibly can. Now, of course, number one is to change your oil and filter regularly. I'm not going to beat that. That's an old horse that's been beaten to death. Just please do it. If you don't do any maintenance on your car at all, except change the oil, at least you're doing something. Use the oil that it suggests on the car. Don't use a different oil. Modern engines are very particular about their oil. And use a quality brand of oil. There are many quality oils out there. Like right here, they all have the API service rating. That said, changing oil is a boring subject. Here's some things you may never have thought of to make your engine last as long as possible. The tire pressure in your car. You might think, what does tire pressure have to do with my engine lasting long? Well, if you have consistently low tire pressure, tires will sit flatter. They'll get hotter because there'll be more friction from not having the correct amount of air in them. The more friction there is, the harder the engine has to work to spin around. Just like dirty oil in your engine, which is more friction, which is going to wear the engine out faster. If your tires don't have enough air in it, you're going to have extra friction going down the road. It's going to strain the engine more, and it will wear it out faster. Now, the next way to make your engine last as long as it can might sound crazy too. Keep your air filter clean. Check it every once in a while. You can knock the dust off, even vacuum it off. And when it gets dirty and you put it up to the sun and you can't see the light anymore, replace your air filter. And here's the main reason. Sure, you'll get better gas mileage with a clean air filter, but if your air filter is clogged, then your car isn't going to have the right air-fuel ratio because there's not enough air sucked into the engine. And if the air-fuel ratio isn't right, the engine can run too hot or it can run too cool, and both are actually bad for an engine. If your engine is running too lean, then the pistons get hotter. Of course, they're going to burn out faster. If your engine runs too rich, of course, you're wasting gas, but a rich engine often is dumping too much gas that gets by the piston rings and gets in the oil. And contaminated oil in your engine with gasoline will wash the lubricants off of all the bearings and metal parts, and your engine will wear out faster. And speaking about wearing out faster, you want to keep your car's coolant clean. Years ago, you more or less had to, or the vehicle would just rust and fall to pieces. I was a young mechanic. Engines were made out of cast iron. Those things all rust. The coolant has anti-rust inhibitors in it to keep that from happening. Now, over time, the inhibitors break down and things start to rust. When I was a young mechanic, you had to change your coolant like once every 3 years. The stuff didn't last all that long. But you might say, hey, Scotty, this is modern times. Most of the engines are made out of aluminum. Aluminum compensates. And aluminum doesn't rust. Aluminum corrodes just as bad as cast iron or steel rusts. And the modern coolants, of course, have anti-corrosion additives to keep the aluminum from corroding. They wear out over time just like anything else does. So you want to check on your own model car about when to change the coolant to keep the engine from wearing out. Some modern cars like Toyotas, some of them come with a 7-year, 150,000 mile HOT coolant. That stands for hybrid organic acid technology. And if you have one like that and you only have to change the coolant once every 7 years or once every 150,000 miles, hey, it's not that big of a deal. But you want to do it when it reaches that level. Because aluminum has many advantages over steel and cast iron for use in engines, but one big disadvantage is the stuff is much softer. And so once you get impurities in the system, it will corrode and it will come apart much faster than steel or cast iron because it's a much softer metal. Now, the next way to make your engine last twice as long is don't over rev the engine. You want to always be driving so that the engine is spinning as fast as it can and either manually shifting the gears late or every time you take off, floor it so it goes as fast as it can before it shifts into second gear. The more you rev the engine, the faster it's going to wear out. I'm not saying you can't have fun driving your car around. Most modern cars, you're going the speed limit. Someplace out here in West Texas, the speed limit's 85 miles an hour. That isn't going to hurt any modern car, but you don't want to go 0 to 85 miles an hour as fast as you possibly can. You just want to do it gradually. Just like when you're driving around here, I live in the big city of Houston, it makes no sense to be revving and going as fast as you can in the city because there's traffic jams everywhere. You don't want to wear out the engine and the transmission by revving it up too much. And that leads me into the next way to make your engine last twice as long. You want to make sure the transmission is full of the right fluid and clean fluid. As it wears, it gets dirty, there's more friction, it works less efficiently, and of course your gas mileage will go down, but that makes the engine work harder. Anything that creates more friction between the engine and the wheels spinning on the road is going to make the engine wear out faster. And I know some of these modern cars say, oh, the automatic transmission fluid is lifetime. Yeah, ask the engineers what that means. I have. What the engineers told me was, well, Scotty, that means that the fluid is good for the lifetime of the transmission. And I'd say, what's the lifetime of the transmission? And I'd say like, oh, well, the warranty is for 75,000 miles. So it still is a good idea to change that fluid regularly. Don't listen to people that say, oh, it's lifetime, because when the lifetime is up, they're not going to give you a new transmission free. You're either going to pay them thousands and thousands of dollars to fix it or replace the transmission, or they're going to sell you another car and say, oh, well, that one's worn out, its lifetime's over, time for a new car. And modern cars are so computer controlled and so interrelated that even for a mechanic like myself who's been doing it for 51 years, I can get cars come in and it's very hard for me to figure out, does it have an engine problem or does it have a transmission problem, because they both have sensors that feed back to a computer, and it can really confuse you as to where the root problem is. So you don't want to get in that situation in the first place. If you take care of the fluid in the transmission, that'll also take care of the engine. The next tip is a very important tip, and it's probably one that most people don't think of. You want to minimize the starting and stopping of your engine. And here's why. When you start up an engine, that's when the most wear occurs inside an engine, because the oil has to be pumped up to the top to lubricate the cams. It wears the most every time you start it up. So if you're continually half a mile to the convenience store and back, turning it on, turning it off, that will actually wear your engine out faster than taking a long trip all the time. As a general rule of thumb, highway driving at a steady speed like 65 miles an hour, wear in the engine is about 10% of what it is in stop and go and start and stop city driving. Let's say you drive 2,000 miles on a highway at 65. That's equivalent to like 200 miles of stop and go and start and stop, because there isn't that much wear when you're going down the road and everything's functioning smooth and the wind's blowing cool in the engine. That's the least wear you're ever going to get on your engine. And that's one of the main reasons that you can see guys in these big 18-wheel diesel trucks driving on the highway and they say, oh, well, you know, they got 1 million miles on this truck. Only a few 100,000 of those miles had been all stop and go traffic in the city. That thing would be in a junkyard by now. It's because it's mainly going 65 miles on the highway where everything's running smoother. You will minimize wear by minimizing the amount of times you start and stop the vehicle. And this is a big reason I'm not a fan of that modern start-stop technology. When you come to a stop, the engine turns itself off. Because yes, over time, that will wear your engine out faster. There's no doubting that. And my last tip, when you do need parts, use quality parts. Don't use the cheapest thing you can get your hand on. One real big example is a mass airflow sensor. These sensors measure how much air goes in the engine, so the computer decides how much fuel to spray with the fuel injectors to make it run right. And if you have one that's gone bad and you say, oh, the dealer one costs $350, but I can get this one that's made in China for $89. Believe me, don't try the $89 one, because air-fuel ratio has to be perfect for a modern car. And those sensors are very complex inside. They're relatively expensive to create, and if you get a cheap knockoff one, in the past I tried to save customers money by doing that, and it always bit me in the rear end. Sometimes they didn't work at all, sometimes they worked worse, sometimes they worked for a few months, but then when I started seriously analyzing them, every time I put one on, I get my fancy scan tool out, and believe me, hardly any of them worked perfectly. They all had glitches in them. So if your car does need parts, make sure you're getting quality ones, especially if you're talking about any kind of computer sensors. You want to stick to quality electronic parts when your car needs them. So now you know how to make your engine last at least twice as long. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.